Welcome. My name is Emma Glazer. I work for Temple Israel of Boston as the administrator for our Center for Adult Jewish Learning. We're so thrilled to have so many of you here joining us for such an important program. I'm going to briefly introduce our first speaker, who will then introduce the rest of our amazing panelists that we have today. But before I do that, one quick logistical note, which is that if you have any questions for our panelists for the Q&A, you can send them to Paula Apsell in the chat. And if you have any Zoom questions or the sound or anything like that, you can send them either to me or to my colleague Erin. Her Zoom name is CAJL at TI. So you can send that to either one of us. And we're really, really thrilled to have you all here. I know everyone in Boston is very busy preparing for the big snowstorm we're about to get. So thank you so much for taking time out of your day to join us. Um, and without further ado, I will introduce Karen, who she and her family have been members of the Temple Israel community for 3 generations. Her parents met at a Temple Israel dance in 1942. Her family joined Temple Israel in Karen's adolescence. She taught art in the Sunday school after college graduation, and her son was bar mitzvahed at Temple Israel 23 years ago. Karen is the founding director of the Locker Memory Memorial Project at the Jungfernhof. I am so sorry, excuse me. At the Jungfernhof concentration camp, where her grandparents were murdered in 1942, the same year her parents met. She's a professor at Lesley University in Cambridge and a research associate at the Hadassah Brandeis Institute at Brandeis University. And without further ado, Karen, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you so much. So, if you are joining us from Boston, thank you for choosing to be inside with us on this Zoom chat today. My first thank you goes to Temple Israel of Boston, a leading force in Boston's Jewish community, and to also Emma and Erin, who are helping to organize this chat. For 3 generations, Temple Israel's deep commitment to social justice and its caring community has touched my family and surpassed all expectations. I am grateful for the opportunity to bring my life's work to this community. My second thank you goes to Ilya Lenski, who has made this project possible, and to the immensely talented team of professionals with whom I've had the pleasure to work. The expertise of Richard Plavniks, Philip Reeder, and Ilya Lenski will be on view today. So now I'm going to begin by reading a short biography of the different speakers in order of their appearance, and we'll save all questions for the end to be moderated by Paula Apsel. So Richard Plavniks is the project's lead historian, an American Latvian and associate professor at Florida Southern College. He is the author of Nazi Collaborators on Trial During the Cold War, and with Victor's RIs, published, and the Latvian Auxiliary Police, Security Police, published in 2017, and in Latvian translation in 2020. Ilya Lenski, the Latvian Jewish community representative, is director of the Museum Jews in Latvia in Riga, Latvia, and the Latvian delegate to the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance. Dr. Philip Reeder is the geoscientist who located the physical proof of the camp's existence, a professor in the Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering and Science at Duquesne University. And our program will be moderated by Paula S. Apsel, Senior Executive Producer, Emerita at Nova, CEO, Leading Edge Productions, and Executive Producer and Co-Director of the feature documentary Resistance, They Fought Back. Paula first introduced me to Richard Frond, who led the initial team of geospatial scientists for this project, and I encourage everyone to see her documentary film Resistance. So I am now going to upload my screen, and hopefully this is all going to go smoothly. Does everyone see that? Oops.
Yep, you're all set.
Okay. I don't know why. I'm just trying to move this over. Okay. Great. Thank you. So I'm going to show you, begin with showing you 2 slides. One is that this is a listing of the panelists, And then on the other side are the listing of all the people that are not with us today that helped to contribute to this amazing project. And I would also mention that with all of these names, everyone got paid, which is hard to believe, except for the advisors. So I'm really proud that that worked out. I think that is very respectful. I wanted professionals to be working with us, and the students did not get paid by me. Um, the second is to thank our foundational support. And these are the primary people that contributed to our project, but below is a listing of other people that also did contribute. Um, I would like to begin by making a personal statement. I am dedicating this presentation to my husband, Dr. Brent Levinson, who died 10 weeks ago. I teach courses about grief and trauma, particularly in relation to Holocaust memory. However, the intimate nature of this loss is new. Losing one's spouse also stirs memories about earlier losses, such as that of my parents, particularly in this instance, my father's escape from Austria. Today, we live in a world that is filled with collective grief. My work concerns the history and memory of a forgotten camp where close to 4,000 German and Austrian Jews were deported. And I use the word forgotten as one of many terms that we interchangeably use to describe this camp. In sharing my work with you, I will discuss ideas about collective grief and national trauma transmitted across generations while we consider new methods for dealing with difficult histories. I will conclude my presentation with plans for memorial development in Riga at the camp where my grandparents were murdered. So I begin with a question, and I'll start also by showing you this picture. When did this project begin? And there were many starting dates. Although my father never spoke directly about the Holocaust or his life in Vienna, his parents' tiny passport pictures hung visibly on the wall of our living room. From a young age, I knew about the Holocaust without being able to name it. Fast forward to the late 1990s, in my mother's basement, I discovered a box of documents detailing my father's escape from Vienna. These papers included 70 letters written by my grandparents to my father while he was in exile before they were deported to Riga. As a young lawyer and the eldest son, my father carried the profound responsibility to rescue his parents. I set out to research my family's history, my father's arrest and escape in 1938. He fled Vienna by way of Rotterdam, Portugal, New York, Mexico, and Cuba, where he experienced identity theft before gaining legal entry into the US. Meanwhile, the borders to Vienna closed, and 2 years later, my grandparents were deported to the Jungfernhof concentration camp. I mention these details to explain how much of my family's history is entwined with my work in Riga. In 2007, I visited Riga and traveled to the abandoned camp. And here you see the picture of a road that has been improved since that date. I was confronted with a sense of fear and disgust. The site was an isolated landfill filled with trash and rubble. At that moment, I pledged to do something to correct that experience. In 2010, I returned to Riga to present a proposal for a permanent memorial. Researching the camp, I found only a vague reference to a farm, which I used to pitch the idea of an organic farm attached to a cultural center. I described my concept as a sukkah, a shelter of peace, which appealed to many Jewish community, but was many members of the Jewish community, but was ultimately rejected. The site was deemed too remote, and Latvia lacked financial support. In retrospect, the idea was naive and lacked historic rigor. In 2019, I returned with a new proposal. Ilya Lenski, who remembered our 2010 meeting, arranged for me to meet with various officials. This time there was interest from local authorities, but it was contingent on my ability to find a lost mass grave on the land believed to contain 800 bodies. Ilya and I have continued to work together since then. I wrote grants, hired a talented team of historians and scientists, whom you will hear from today. It was clear that to warrant a permanent memorial at this abandoned site, I needed to first establish a body of rigorous research and evidence. The Locker of Memory project began as a grassroots effort with me as the leader and instigator. The interdisciplinary design created many opportunities for collaboration, moving from archival research to website development. Today, the project functions as a virtual memorial. Commemoration in a changing world is about the past. While history is about the past, commemoration is about the past in the present. We are living in unprecedented times filled with disinformation and global challenges. How will a permanent memorial stay active and dynamic to meet the challenges of a changing world? So I'm going to run through a bunch of slides and I'm going to pause when my time is up, which might be very soon. And these slides begin with the methodologies used to do this project. And you can see with all of the people that were hired, this is a complex project and it's very varied. And it's actually, if you go on the website, it's both overwhelming and entertaining. I'm just going to show some random pictures for a couple of minutes and then stop. So this is the website. And these are examples of what you can find on the website, databases. This was one of the projects of projecting onto a train station and what that looked like. I worked with all of the historians and Nicholas, our videographer, to create a short video that got used in different places at different times. This is Ilya in the corner house, which was the KGP headquarters. Speaking, putting up our video there for the first time, uniting but not conflating two different histories about deportations and genocide in Latvia. And this is what it looked like in that museum. This is at a commencement and a celebration at Choral Synagogue, an annual event to remember the Holocaust. And this is Dr. Westermanis, who was a survivor and who today is 103. He's still with us. This is the evil man that did all the terrible things at Jungfernhof. I waited for years to see what he looked like, and Fred Zimick, one of our historians, found this picture, which is on top of a wonderful essay that Richards wrote about this camp, which I'm sure he will reference today. This is a map made by Sek himself of the site. It's a little out of proportion. This is an heirloom project that I did with survivors and descendants, bringing in projects and telling stories about these projects. It's very detailed and lovely. This is interviewing two survivors that were incredible friends. They grew up in the same town, two houses apart from each other. They've been friends their whole life. Both of them, unfortunately, have passed away. But they were extraordinary men, and I really love talking with them. This is the memory map. This talks about, you can find this on the website. This talks about all of the sites around Jungfernhof that were killing sites and other concentration camp sites. And you can click on them. And in fact, one of the issues with Jungfernhof and its lack of being represented among this group with a memorial is that it's connected to all of these sites. And you get to learn about that by opening up this map. We also created this unbelievably complex interactive timeline that on the left looks at the timeline itself and it interacts with the map. So you can click on things and learn about each site and what happened at each site. And we go from when the population at the camp was started with 3,895 prisoners down to zero. So you can follow and track that. I must be almost out of time. This is an image of our 3D tour and all the different sites that we went to. And Ilya went to each site with our videographer to photograph it. This is an example of the tour, what it looks like. This is the Brichineki Forest. Again, it's completely detailed. If you've never been there, you can visit it now with this tour, which is the first tour in Latvia. This is an incredible set of audio tapes recorded by Evan Robbins, who worked with Fred Zimick on different relevant topics about this camp. They're fascinating to listen to. This is a mural at the camp. This is a sign at the camp. This is an old map at the camp. This is when I spoke at the United Nations. I must be out of time soon. This is Fred Zimick. If you are interested in what he looks like, my two favorite contributions that he made is this chart, which tracks almost month by month what happened to this camp. We never had that information. I don't know how he found it. And I also love this chart, which is extremely large and complex. But what he did here is he talked about the prisoners and their backgrounds. They were teachers, they were doctors, they were dentists. It's just really incredible and honoring so many of these
So,
victims.
Karen, you have 3 minutes left, and just it's important to mention the URL of the website so that people can go and explore it
Yes,
themselves.
I do that at the end. There's a
Fine, thank
page
you.
where I do that. I'm just gonna, this is the day of remembrance. There were lots of incredible things that happened, including a mourning shroud that I designed with three artists. And we took it outside and walked across the Brandeis campus holding it. Ilya brought earth from Jungfernhof that we sprinkled underneath it. It was quite an event. These are pictures of the scientific research, which I'm not going to go on about because Phil is going to do that. But this is a presentation that Phil made at Jungfernhof about his work. And this is a memorial. I'm going to stop here. I hope I'm in advance of my time, which would be great. I will save this for when the memorial, for when we close, and I will discuss the memorial project. Thank you very much.
So it's now, thank you very much, Karen. And now it's Richard Splavniak's time to discuss the history of Jungfernhof.
Thank
Richard.
you so much, Paula, and thank you, Karen. So my name is Dr. Richard Splavniks. I'm Associate Professor of History at Florida Southern College, and I'm the lead historian of the Locker of Memory Project. But I want to say right at the outset that a descendant of survivors, Fred Zimick, has done the majority of the shovel and spade work for all of the information that I'm going to present today. And so he has my everlasting gratitude for that. As does Evan Robbins, who is a graduate student at Cambridge in the UK, who was Fred's partner throughout most of the research around 2021, 2022, 2023. And I'm also grateful to people like Ilya Lenski in Latvia, without whose help, none of this would be happening, as well as students and academics and diplomats from Germany and Austria. So it's really been an international project. And Karen brought me in 2019. And the first thing we did was write an article for the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum's Camps and Ghettos Encyclopedia about the Jungfernhof camp. And that was in 2019. And I scoured the English language and German language sources, secondary sources, to try to put this article together. And man, the amount of information that has come to light that we've discovered in the last 5 years has necessitated a total rewrite of that original article. So we've uncovered way, way, way more than I could possibly even begin to impart to you in 15 minutes. And so if you want to find out more details, you can go to the website that Karen referenced. But for today, what I want to do is just give you a kind of thumbnails history of the camp. So what really is the story of the Jungfernhof concentration camp? And I also want to make sure that it's clear what part this camp played in the overall context of the Holocaust, the giant Nazi extermination project. So the site itself is first appears in history in a document from 1259. It was a convent after the German crusaders took over the Baltic region. And then it was a medieval manor with the German lord and Latvian peasants for hundreds and hundreds of years, was basically abandoned in the 1700s, was part of the World War I battlefield landscape around Riga, and then utterly disused in the interwar period. But the site became the first Nazi concentration camp in Latvia. And like Karen pointed out, it was part of a constellation of sites of Nazi persecution and violent crimes in Latvia, committed mainly against Jewish civilians of German, Austrian, and Latvian nationality, but also against Soviet prisoners of war and a variety of different categories of ethnic Latvian targets. And it functioned collectively as part of a system of slave labor and mass murder in Latvia. So I'm going to share my screen now, and I have a series of slides that I'm going to use, and hopefully these slides will help you understand what I'm telling you about here. So this is a map of Europe from May of 1941. So that is to say, once Germany had polished off France and taken over the Low Countries and Denmark and Norway and so on, and the Soviets had cashed in on their side of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, this is the status quo. So this is prior to Germany's breaking the strategic partnership with the Soviet Union and invading the Soviet Union in June of 1941. So the Baltic states, on the eve of the German invasion, which started on June 22nd, 1941, had been occupied by the USSR for about exactly a year. And during that year, the Soviet military set up an airstrip at the Jungfernhof site. During the Soviet occupation, which in Latvia was called the Baigaisgads, the year of horror, about 2% of the population vanished at the hands of Stalin and the NKVD. So where Jungfernhof is located is in the country of Latvia. And when the Germans conquered Latvia, along with the rest of the Baltic states, very quickly following the invasion of the Soviet Union, they reorganized it administratively into something called the Reichskommissariat Ostland, the Reichskommissariat Ostland. So this means that there is no Latvian national sovereignty, no statehood under the Nazi occupation. And most diabolically, the Nazis exploited Soviet atrocities that were committed against the locals to mobilize hatred for their own purposes. This map here shows the maximum extent of German expansion under the Nazis. So this is a map from the end of 1942. And I want to show you this map while I describe the general trajectory of the Holocaust as a whole, as a set of anti-Jewish policies that span the whole continent. And that will hopefully help you understand what part the Jungfernhof camp fit into. So almost all genocides happen during wars. It's almost always a wartime context. And so the Holocaust took place during World War II. One of the conundrums that the Nazis faced is that every time they successfully managed a territorial expansion, starting from the annexation of Austria in 1938, their so-called Jewish problem got that much bigger. So every new territorial conquest, there's a corresponding setback in the Nazi demographic situation, according to their ideology. They have more Jews to worry about inside their borders. And so when the Nazis, for example, took over Poland, that's now 3 million Jews inside the borders of the Reich. And so starting with 1939, those people were warehoused in gigantic urban slums that the Nazis called ghettos. The Nazis, of course, also conquered Denmark and Norway and the Low Countries and France, and they consolidate their position in the Balkans. They conquer Greece. And every time they do that, there are now more Jews that are worrying Hitler. And so the plan for how to solve that so-called Jewish question changes in 1941 with the invasion of the Soviet Union. That inaugurates what historians have called the Holocaust by bullets. So the solution became further territorial conquest will not incur a setback in demographics, i.e. more Jewish people, because the SS is going to kill all of the Jews as they go. And so that was the mission of Einsatzkommando 2, which was part of the Einsatzgruppen. So those are the death squads that moved behind the German army with the invasion of the Soviet Union. And Einsatzkommando 2's mission was to kill all of the Jews in Latvia. But when they encounter really large Jewish populations, such as the population in Liepāja or the population in Riga, ghettos are created there as well. So the Riga ghetto will have about 30,000 inmates. Interesting note is that Hitler was very sensitive to German public opinion, and he knew that Germans did not like really overt acts of violence right in their face. And so to protect the German population from the genocidal reality of Hitler's policies, no ghettos were ever constructed in Germany. And the Star of David was only mandated for Jews to wear in Germany starting in September of 1941. So that's, well over a year after, 2 years basically after Jews in Poland had to start wearing the Star of David. In late November, Hitler decides it's now time to begin deportations of German and Austrian Jews from the Reich to points east to be killed. And also in early December 1941, the first prototype gassing facility in occupied Poland at Chełmno comes online. So that's the context. So this is a still image from a Nazi propaganda reel that was taken at Stuttgart. So the Nazis were concerned with optics and how all of this would be remembered. And so when the Jews of Germany were deported to places like Riga in late 1941, they made sure that this was recorded. So it's documented proof that they were treating these deportees with humane consideration, making sure their luggage all had their name tags on it, feeding them steaming stew, and so on. And so 4 transports were organized of approximately 1,000 deportees each from the cities of Nuremberg, Stuttgart, Vienna, and Hamburg, totaling 3,985 people. And we know the names of every single one of them, and only 149 of them survived the Holocaust. When these people's trains crossed the German frontier, the heat was turned off and they entered the Holocaust. This is a still image from a video that our project made back in 2022. This is at the site, and this is about what was waiting for those 4,000 people at the site. Just ruins and snow. So they detrain at the Szkirotowa railway stop. They walk a couple of kilometers to this site on the Daugava River. It's the coldest winter on record. It's late November or early December when they arrive. And people begin to die of exposure to sub-zero temperatures the very first night. And the first work detail organized at the camp was to collect the bodies and to begin stacking them up because the ground is frozen and it's impossible to bury them. The well froze, so river water had to be consumed, and there wasn't enough firewood to boil it, and so there's a typhoid outbreak. Also, almost immediately after arrival, about 200 able-bodied men were sent to work to build the Salaspils concentration camp, and few of them were ever heard from again. When inmates got sick, they would be told by the commandant would say that they were going to be sent to the ghetto for treatment, but in fact, they were just shot somewhere out of sight. And this is the commandant, Rudolf Seck, who was the only permanent German personnel on the site. He was born in 1908 in northern Germany, farming family, joined the Nazi Party in 1931 and the SS, so that's 2 years before Hitler became chancellor. And he was 33 years old in 1941 when he became the arbiter of life and death over 4,000 people at this site. He ruled it as a fief, and the whole purpose that he was told, his mission, was to turn this into a farm to grow food for the SS. The Holocaust could not have been accomplished without local participation, i.e. non-German participation. So everywhere the Nazis went, they managed to recruit willing collaborators. This is a picture from 1942 of a group of newly trained Latvian auxiliary security police. The guy with the number 3 on his sleeve in the front row is Viktors Arais. He is the commander of the Latvian Auxiliary Security Police. This is the unit I wrote my book about. During that first winter of 41-42 at Jungfernhof, of the 4,000 deportees sent there, about 800 died of exposure or disease, or were wantonly killed out of hand by the commandant or RI's commando guards. There were about 20 who were detailed to the site. In February of 1942, dynamite arrived for the purpose of blasting out a pit to use as a mass grave. More diabolical Nazi depredations followed. So Commandant Sek wanted to reduce the population to 450 able-bodied laborers. And so the Nazis concocted a ploy claiming that there was another facility that people who wouldn't be able to handle outdoor demanding work would go and be sent to this fish cannery. But of course, it was all made up. So they got some volunteers, and the balance of the number was just selected by SEC, such that approximately 1,800 prisoners were shot by the Arise Commando at the nearby Biekernieki forest on the second day of the so-called Dunemünde action.
So, Richard, it's Paula. I just want to remind you, you have just a couple of minutes left. And I also want to remind our participants, our viewers, that they can, if they come up with questions along the way, just please write them in the chat and we'll be able to use them afterwards.
Okay, thanks very much, Paula. So following the Dunemünde action, the remaining 450 Jews at the site were relatively strong, young, healthy people whose whole entire extended families had just been neglected to death or murdered. The first thing they do is break up the Soviet landing strip and start planting crops. They will then spend the next year living on the premises, and there's a lot of information that we discovered about what life was like that unfortunately we don't have time to talk about. But suffice to say, for now, in 1943, as the war turned, the camp was broken up and finally in 1944 dismantled entirely. The remaining inmates were sent to the Kaiserwald transfer camp. So that's a facility that was used to send all of the, basically all of the slaves who hadn't been killed yet were sent to Poland through Kaiserwald and then death marched into Germany. There's a whole other story concerning the post-war aftermath of all of this legally. Commandant Sek was arrested by the British in 1945, transferred to West German custody, convicted first of membership in the SS and sentenced to 10 years in prison, and then convicted of 8 counts of murder, sentenced to life in prison in 1951, but was then released in 1964 and died in 1974 a free man. Here is a drone shot that our project took in 2022 of the site. I just want to say one last thing. So some of the site's pre-existing structures were demolished after the Dunemünde killing. Other structures were repaired and others were built from scratch. So structures included a well, a sewing shop, a carpenter shop, a clinic, 3 barracks, 3 warehouses, 2 stables, a mill, a barn, and Commandant Sek's headquarters. And the barracks were built by the inmates. And it's the barracks, though we were looking for the mass grave, it's the barracks that we've actually found. And so that's all I have time to share with you today, but I look forward to the question and answer.
Thank you so much, Richard. And Ilya, let's move on to you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Richard. So while I'm loading my presentation, I just wanted to express obviously gratitude to Karen for her enormous work for almost 16 years now. And it's very important to understand if it was not for Karen, nothing would happen at this site. So in my 14 minutes, I'll discuss 2 things. One, how generally Holocaust memory developed in Latvia since 45, and what specifically happened in Jungfernhof, or actually did not happen, and why we are where we are. So we're still discussing how to commemorate in the future. So here you can see the time frame, and we have to remember that in 1944-45, Latvia was reoccupied by the Soviet Union, which stayed until 1990. Some Russian troops stayed until 1994, actually. And so the commemoration of Holocaust was always an interplay between several stakeholders, several groups. These would be the authorities, Soviet, and then authorities of re-established independent Latvian Republic. These would be the relatives of the victims, and these would be Jewish organizations, and these would be local historians, museologists, librarians. We call them memory multipliers. So here you can see a certain time frame. I just want to warn you that some of the pictures I'll show you may find triggering and problematic, but I guess if you're attending a Holocaust-themed event, you're ready. And so we have to understand. So when Soviet army recaptures Latvia, there is this extraordinary state commission working, preparing documentation on losses that Soviet Union suffered from the Nazis. They're preparing documents for what would become Nuremberg trial. They're not dealing specifically with Holocaust, but they also extensively document what we describe as the Holocaust, or as the Soviet terminology was, the murder of Jewish Soviet citizens or Jewish Soviet civilians. So they uncover mass graves. They usually just mark them in a certain way. So either with a small fence, or like here in a village called Riga, just with pine tree branches placed on them just to distinguish it from the surrounding soil. And that's it. So they're not dealing with installing memorials. They're just marking the places what they have discovered, and they're describing that there is a pit, and then whatever, 2 by 7 meters. If the corpses were burned, as quite often happened, so there was a special program by Nazis to exhume and burn the corpses, so then there would be just a mixture of ashes and bones and sand in the pit, so they would estimate how many people may have been buried there. So it's a whole different story about how trustworthy are these numbers, but the sites, they mark them usually. And so here you can see a commemorative prayer in 47 by surviving relatives of the victims who came to pay tribute. And first signs, memorial signs, were installed by the relatives as early as 1945. Yeah, so for example, here in small town called Jaunjelgava, you can see it's just an it's made of a piece of tin, but then more permanent memorials are installed. And here I just used this photo from village of Vila, town of Viljani in eastern Latvia. So there you can see on the right there is a memorial with Hebrew inscription, which was installed by the relatives of the victims. But next to it, on the left, you can see this Soviet concrete stela, which was installed in late 50s, with the inscription to Soviet civilians. And in rare cases, the Soviet stela would also say that these were Jewish victims, but usually it would say Soviet civilians or something like that. So it's important that sometimes these two strings of memory coexisted. And then, of course, there were major sites like Rumbula Forest in Riga, where prisoners of Riga Ghetto were killed on 2 days, 25,000 people. So their attempts to commemorate were seen as political. So that's just an excerpt from a document where Soviet authorities, they specifically discuss that reinterment of the Jews from Rumbula Forest to Jewish cemetery will provoke the gathering of big amount of Jews at the cemetery. And on the other hand, the process itself can provoke among the Jews unwanted discussions about the Soviet regime or the Soviet authorities. And it's 49, so when Stalin launches his last major anti-Jewish campaign. And then, just an example, in 1958, when Yad Vashem in Jerusalem asks to send them the kind of remains or ashes to be buried at this Valley of Communities that some of you may have visited. So the Soviet authorities instruct that they should receive the response that the victims were Soviet civilians and Soviet organizations object standing against the burial of their remains abroad. So it's very important that for Soviet, these were Soviet citizens and they have saying, but not anybody else, not the Jews. But in case of Rumbula, it was too important place for the Jews just to wait for something to be installed. So in 1962, there gathered a group of young Zionist activists, some of whom had already problems with KGB because of their political activism. Like here, you can see on the right two gentlemen, Dov Sperling and Josef Schneider. They've already served their term in camp in Gulag. So they started cleansing the overgrown, overforested territory of Rumbula. They found the locations of the graves, and they've started a kind of grassroots campaign. So a lot of people would be coming to clean the territory on Sundays when, people had their day off work. So they would come on their own to clean the territory. They would themselves just bring shovels and so on. And then in 64, finally, they managed to get a memorial sign installed. It's important. So if you look at this memorial sign, it says to the victims of fascism. It says it in Latvian and in Russian and in Yiddish. And the inscription in Yiddish with Hebrew characters is basically the only thing that gives you a hint that these were Jewish victims. Now, later to Rumbula Memorial was added another stone which said that there were also political prisoners and POWs, which was absolutely wrong. So when in 2002, the Jewish community, with a lot of help of other organizations, was remodeling the memorial, this was removed because it was totally misleading. While this memorial with Hebrew inscription we preserved and it still stands today in Rumbula Memorial. So it's important that until late 60s, Soviet authorities tried to kind of hijack the memory at some point. Yeah, so here you can see it's an official rally in Rumbula Forest with a slogan, "It should never happen again." Actually, we know that there were official speakers coming, and speeches would refer, for example, to international issues like the war in Vietnam. So the Soviets tried to kind of instrumentalize it in their political needs. But generally, Soviets felt rather uncomfortable with the Holocaust memory. They were much more comfortable with memory of fallen soldiers, for example, but not with the Holocaust, because you could not present the Holocaust victims as martyrs. And so most of the Holocaust memorials would be very simple, like stela or small rock, although there were some very powerful examples. Yeah, like this memorial in Bauska, designed by a local artist, which is very powerful, I think. Yeah, and it's 1971. So situation changed in 1990s, well, basically starting with 88, when Latvia started moving towards regaining independence. Local activists, local historians, and so on would be installing monuments. I think one of the most powerful of the memorials from the 90s is this memorial in a town of Madona in central Latvia, at the place where political prisoners and Jews were murdered together. So it's just on a forest opening. You enter it and you see a huge skull. And I mean, it's really powerful, and there is just a small inscription describing what happened here. So now these memorial signs would become sometimes more artistic, or, for example, in this case, the town of Jelgava, very much initiated by local historian Andris Tomašūns, who is a very prominent Latvian historian, non-Jewish himself. So the memorial where you can see that there are bullets coming from the sky, breaking the tree. So these would be the activities of local historians. And something rather important would be the finalization in 2001, the memorial in Biturnieki Forest in Riga, and the remodeling of memorial in Rumbula Forest. These were completed with a funding that came from an organization called the German People's Union for Preservation of War Graves, which was created after World War I to take care of military cemeteries, which were scattered all over Europe. But at some point they started dealing also with a memorial in Biturnieke because these were German Jews who were killed there. And so they created a special committee called Riga Committee, uniting municipalities. There are 60 plus municipalities now. So which sponsored the creation of the Biturnieke Memorial and helped to finalize the memorial in Rumbula. And so these you still can see. Very important thing was that since 1998, there worked a commission of historians, and they, in 2003, assisted us. So they sent out letters to all municipalities in Latvia saying, if you have Holocaust graves on your territory, please inform us if these are marked or unmarked and on ownership status and so on. And so we, after that, so most of the municipalities responded. So we started going there. Our late colleague Mayor Smellers would go there. So we installed monuments on an unmarked place. Sometimes we supplemented already existing Soviet memorials with the new ones. We were assisted by an enormous number of people, like in this village of Vetsbebri, where 2 Jews were killed. We were shown by the forest wardens the place where they were killed. We thought that it's impossible to find a place where 2 people were killed in the forest, but it turned out that the forest wardens were passing this memory from one to another for 70 plus years. So now to Jungfernhof. Why nothing happened in Jungfernhof? So Richards mentioned the Soviets in 1940 built an airstrip there. After 1944, the Soviets returned to this idea of creating an airstrip. And this is a document from 1947 concerning transfer of land from ownership of the city of Riga, and it was owned by the municipality as a farm, as agricultural land, to Ministry of Defense for continuation of construction of airstrip. Here you can see a kind of rectangle on the lower part, and if we do the close-up of this document, we can see about 17 buildings standing. And there is actually a list of these buildings, but describing them only from physical point of view. There is a masonry building with a shingle roof, masonry building with straw roof, but says nothing about their function and says nothing about the usage of the camp during the period of the camp. So if in 1947 map, you still can see there are a lot of buildings, then in 1963, you see that most of the buildings are gone because these were dismantled. The territory was allocated to this military airfield, which actually still exists. If you're interested in Cold War history, you can go and see hangars for fighter jets. So until late 80s, early 90s, it was actually a restricted military area. You quite often can find in the documents relating to Holocaust in Riga, people referencing the camp in Mazjumprevas, which is Latvian name for Jungfernhof, but nobody ever mentions any commemoration there because it's a restricted military area. So since 1990s, you would have attempts by German municipalities to install something. And so I'll just briefly show some of the photos you've already seen. But what's important, this territory was in late 80s partially allocated for garden allotments. So that's why you can see some garden allotments around the ruins. And also there were plans to build a residential neighborhood. So this building is a central building. It was a manor house and later the commandatur of the camp. So this is what I saw when I first came to the camp in 2006. It was one of my first assignments in the museum. I was documenting these places, and basically that's how this place looks now. It was dismantled to produce bricks for construction.
Ilya,
So,
I'm
so
afraid that we're out of time, but I
yeah,
think this,
one minute, 1 minute.
okay, 1 minute.
Yeah, I see. Sorry, 1 minute. So what's important? Uh, if in 2008 there were ideas to create a residential neighborhood, uh, then from 2013 the city is developing it as a kind of recreational area, but not in the sense of active recreation, like a basketball field or whatever, but it's a park. So the territory of the estate, the central area, is officially taken out of the territory allocated for construction. So now it's a territory that cannot be built over, what's very important. And they've restored one of the buildings. You can see it here under red roof, which was a former water mill, uh, for usage as cultural space. So there are lectures happening, small-scale concerts like chamber music, folk music. Karen and Philip Reeder gave lecture in this building. So we are now working with Riga municipality, but also with local kind of neighborhood group to get uh, the specific location, which Philip will discuss, parceled out as a zone for the memorial. And so we hope in uh, first days of July to hold a symbolic kind of groundbreaking ceremony uh, at this very location. What is the location, why it's so important, and how we discovered it, Philip will tell better. I'm sorry
Right.
for taking too much of your time. Thank you.
A wonderful segue to Phil. Thank you very much, Ilya. Phil?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ilya. And let's get my slideshow started. So, as I was introduced earlier, I'm Philip Reeder. I'm from Duquesne University, which is in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, in the United States. And I'm a geoscientist. And as a geoscientist, I've been working with the research team since 1999. We actually started off in Israel, working on projects in Israel, up until 2015, when we were invited to work at a project at the Great Synagogue of Vilnius in Vilnius, Lithuania. And by happenstance, we met Ilya Lenski on one of our projects. We were at Fort 9 doing research in Kaunas, Lithuania, and were invited to come up to Latvia and to bring the research team up there as well and to work in Latvia. And we started in 2021 working at the Jungfernhof site. As geoscientists, one of the things that we're interested in is gathering together all the existing information about any place that we're going to work at and study. Luckily, the Jungfernhof site has aerial photograph coverage. There's an aerial photograph from 1917 here on the left-hand side. And then what I've done is sort of outlined the buildings so that the buildings stand out more clearly. And then there's one building of interest right here that I'm going to spend some time talking about in a few minutes, right there. And then this is superimposed onto a 2022 satellite image so that we can see sort of the perspective of what things look like now and then what was there at one time. And then in 2024, we were lucky enough working with the archives in Riga to find an air photograph from 1944 that we knew nothing about. And that air photograph from 1944 had an indication of where that barracks that Richard's talked about was constructed. So as geoscientists, one of the things we're doing is we're trying to develop targets for what we're looking for. So Richard gave a very nice overview of the timeline. We, as geoscientists, are certainly interested in the history of a place as well. And then the context of what we do in developing these targets, one of which was the mass grave that was created in 1942 by blasting a hole in the ground and then burying the 800 victims that died from exposure, disease, and murder over that hard winter of 1942. Those 800 bodies are somewhere around that location of Jungfernhof, and we don't know where. In 2021, that was our first target that we looked for, And I'm going to sort of not give you a scientific presentation, but I'm going to tell you the story of what we've done in these past years working at the Jungfernhof site. And then another target that we developed in the later years of the project, especially in the last 2 years, was to find this barracks location as well, and to find evidence of the barracks. As Richard mentioned, a lot of the buildings that were utilized as part of the concentration camp were from a manor that was formerly there on a farm. So they were dilapidated sheds and barns and stables. But then in 1942, in May and April of 1942, that's when a barracks was constructed. So that became one of our targets as well, was looking for that particular barracks. We use certain very specific tools to try to study these sites, to study the Jungfernhof concentration camp site, and it's called non-invasive archaeology, to be able to look beneath the surface and see what's beneath the surface without having to dig anything up. So one of the tools we use is ground penetrating radar. These are 2 students from my university participating in the project there at Jungfernhof. And what ground penetrating radar does is it shoots FM radio waves from a transmitter down into the earth. It reflects off whatever is beneath the surface of the earth back to a receiver. And then there is software associated with this instrument, which will then paint a picture, draw an image of what's beneath the surface. And I'll show you some of those images shortly. Another technology we use is called electroresistivity tomography. And that's where metal stakes are driven into the ground, and then they are electrified. And electrical current is passed through those stakes down into the earth and then recollected by those stakes. And then what that allows is for a picture again of the subsurface to be created by the software associated with this instrumentation to see what's in the subsurface without having to dig it up. Archaeology uncovers wonderful things from the ancient past, from the near past, but it's also a very destructive process as well when you're doing archaeology. So this non-invasive archaeology allows us to see what's beneath the surface, to perhaps then point the archaeologists in a certain direction to be able to do targeted excavations to find things, in this case, associated with the Jungfernhof camp. And then in 2025, this just past summer, we had a new instrument, which is called an EM38-4, which shoots electrical current into the ground as well, and it maps the conductivity of the soil. So I'm going to talk about some of the data that we were able to recover using these different instruments. We had a very humble beginning in 2021. We did 2 electrical resistivity tomography lines, and we also did 2 ground penetrating radar grids. Through the years, as we came back from 1921 all the way up, or from 2021 all the way up through 2025 last summer, we added on locations where we did more ground penetrating radar, and we also did ERT, and then we did EM38 work this past summer as well. We only did electroresistivity tomography that first year. So here's a plot then of where some of these locations are within where the Jungfernhof camp formerly existed. The dashed lines are where buildings once existed associated with the camp. 2 of them are still present as ruins. This, and then this is the one Ilya just talked about, which became Czech's headquarters, and it's been partially reconstructed. And just to show you some of the data, this is an electroresistivity tomography line. This is a location within that red circle where a building from the former manor that was used as part of the Jungfernhof concentration camp was located. And then you follow this arrow to an electroresistivity tomography plot. And what we're looking at is the fact that you can see there's a solid pink area there, but then there's a big break in that. Solid pink area there, and then there's a big break in those materials. That tells us that something has been created there. A hole's been dug, a building's been constructed, but there is something located there that the electroresistivity tomography is seeing beneath the surface of the earth. This is that same building as imaged using electroresistivity tomography, a special feature that it has, which is called induced polarity, and that shows that there's buried metal objects there as well. So we feel very confident we've found the location of where this building is now in the contemporary landscape. In this area, you can see that the solid material here, solid material there, and there's a big break in that material. Well, that is a structure right there that was found with both ground penetrating radar and electroresistivity tomography as well. We always like to have 2 points of corroboration. where we find some feature with two instruments, giving us even a better understanding of the fact that there is something there and then what might be located there. This is a zoom in of a GPR plot, and this is what a GPR plot looks like. And what you can see here, this is a signal of the fact that there's something in the subsurface there that has a right angle bend to it, an opening, and then around and another right angle bend. Well, this is a building, and this is the remains of a building, and this is the entrance into that building. So we have plotted the location of where this feature is, where this building is, without having to do any archaeology, without having to dig anything up, so that in the future, if there's a desire to do excavation, we know exactly where to point the archaeologist to be able to do that excavation. So that feature here on the ground penetrating radar was also found on the electroresistivity tomography, is this building that was on the 1917 air photograph. And then this would be that entrance that we just saw on that previous plot. We also examined the soils as well. These are some students working at the site and collecting soil samples. In 2022, doing ground penetrating radar, we found an interesting set of anomalies. And again, this is beneath the surface. In this case, in this top frame, it is 1.15 to 1.2 meters beneath the surface. And we're getting some kind of a circular reflection pattern in the surface, more than a meter down. And we are then checking the soils in that area, for one thing, to see if we can pull up physical material, like from the camp, to see if we can bring up perhaps even bone material associated, if this is indeed the mass grave. We spent 2 years examining this data, clarifying this data. At first, we thought that it may be the location of the mass grave. We're of the opinion right now that this is not the location of the mass grave. It's some kind of a feature associated with the camp. We don't quite know what it is. Pictured here on the right-hand side is the fact that students have collected soil samples from all around the site, and they have mapped the soil and found that there's a continuous layer of clay that's just about a meter beneath the surface. So something else that we do is we probe the soil and we look for that clay layer. And if we find places where the clay layer doesn't exist, that may be a good example then of a place where something's been dug up and that clay layer has been removed. Then we go to those sites and we do ground penetrating radar to then gather further data from that location. So we've looked for the location of the mass grave for 5 years at this location. We found a few areas where we thought that, hey, this might be that particular location, but we've come to the conclusion that no, we have not found that exact place yet. We've collected a lot of data from all around where the Jungfernhof concentration camp site was located. We're of the feeling now and a growing opinion that it may be located where these garden housing areas are now, and it may be under there, which could be problematic to be able to collect that data in the future. Recently, the last 2 summers, we've pointed our attention towards finding where the prisoner barracks was that was constructed in April and May of 1942. This is data from 2024. Students from the University of Wisconsin-Eau Claire, where my main collaborator on this project, Dr. Harry Joel, is a professor. These are students. We're collecting ground penetrating radar data. And then what we see, this is a plot from the subsurface. We see this right angle bend in the data here. Nature does not build things with right angle bends. This has to be something that's human constructed. Here it is highlighted down here then with more detail. And here's a corner, and we feel very confidently that we've imaged a corner of the barracks that was built in 1942.
Bill, that's so fascinating. I think we have to move on now
Yeah,
to
I have one more minute.
Yes.
And this is in summer of 2024, doing some ground truthing to see what indeed is in the subsurface. And we believe we found the foundation of the barracks. We returned in 2025, did 5 different ground penetrating radar plots at this location. And we have confirmed we think we found the barracks. Doesn't look like much on the left there. The barracks and the foundation of the barracks is right there. There it is highlighted. So we're very confident we have found a portion of the barracks. We'll be returning in 2025 and we're returning in 2026 to continue this work around the barracks and to map out much of the extent of the barracks as we can as possible. And then in closing, one small component of our project is also we do outreach to local students in Latvia. We bring school students to the site, teach them about science, and teach them about the Holocaust as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Karen. We'll move on to you, and then we will have time for questions.
Okay. Now you can see why I'm working on this project and I'm working with such wonderful people. This has just been a fabulous presentation, and the individual expertise of each speaker is completely apparent. So we are now moving toward memorial development, and that's what I'm going to talk about next. Thank you all for what you've shared. So in 2025, I was commissioned by Latvia's Jewish community to create the concept and design for a memorial project, a permanent memorial at the Jungfernhof concentration camp. I will be the first descendant to create a large-scale Holocaust memorial in Latvia. This prompts a few questions. Can any single memorial, fixed in time and space, truly capture the unprecedented magnitude of the Holocaust? How do memorials promote empathy and remind us of our humanity? Has the fight between democracy and autocracy reframed how we remember the Holocaust? Memorials typically celebrate national heroes or conquests. Monuments typically celebrate. Memorials, on the other hand, tend to focus on the victims, reflective democratic values about justice and accountability, and often run counter to national narratives about strength and power. Over time, memorials mark a nation's evolving consciousness about its history. Following genocide, naming memorials are particularly effective. Remembering the names of victims defies the language of obliteration, providing dignity to the victims and comfort to visiting families. I'm going to begin with my slide share. And some of these slides repeat what Phil just showed, but I will go through them quickly. So you've seen this. So site-specific memorials identify places of significance based on historic evidence. So that's what we're doing now. At the Jungfernhof concentration camp, all records and photos of the site had been destroyed. For 5 years, the Locker of Memory project was steeped in research and evidence gathering. In July 2024, as you've heard from Phil, there was a groundbreaking event where they found historic evidence in the form of recovered stones marking the foundational structure for the barracks. These stones confirmed the history of a camp that is no longer visible to the naked eye. So this is the shape of the barracks. So the question is, the barracks are no longer where we originally thought it was. It's really at a place now that's a little bit centered. Whoops, I'm sorry. Okay. It's a little, not directly in the park. It's actually in a location that is zoned for housing. So it's a little bit at a distance. I don't know if you can see the circle over there. So the question is, what is the storytelling image that I will use in the memorial that will reflect the history of this camp, which is really what we've been working on? So the barracks, and I'm going to show you some images. This is the site where it's going to be. This is what it looks like in the winter. Right now it's an open site. And I'm going to show you pictures of what barracks look like. We don't have pictures of the barracks of Jungfernhof. But we do have pictures of barracks, and they're very standardized, and they're really, they usually contain a 3-story Nazi-style bunk beds for imprisoned Jews, crudely constructed from wooden planks. Prisoners at Jungfernhof were confined to damp, overcrowded sleeping arrangements, exposed to diseases, and these are serious diseases, typhoid, diarrhea, lice, and these barracks also lacked privacy, heat, toilets, and washing facilities. Armed guards would patrol these primitive sites, creating a constant mood of terror and intimidation. While darkness provided some protection, each night became a personal fight for survival. Amid such extreme deprivation, did inmates dream? Were there moments of intimacy or friendship? So how will this memorial look like? What will it look like? I have some very early sketches, but it's really already moved and changed in its structure. Um, the physical presence of these bunk beds constructed by Jewish prisoners at the camp serves as a literal and figurative anchor for the large-scale memorial project at the camp. Their storytelling nature as a place of confinement and sleep deprivation also personifies the perpetual deception present at every phase of Jungfernhof's history. In the spring of 1942, the camp was reconfigured into an agricultural farm for slave laborers. Prisoners report they were forced to plant a field of potatoes designed to conceal a mass grave containing more than 800 bodies. The camp closed in 1944 after Soviet occupation until 1990, and when Latvia regained its independence. In 2017, the land belonging to the camp was repurposed as a public park, with the park's placard omitting any reference to the mass grave or the camp's history of murder. In 2019, as a descendant of murdered victims, I broke the silence around the camp, and I created the Locker of Memory Project, committed to representing the full story of this camp's dark history, which you've gotten just a snapshot of today. Memorials are keepers of history. By using historic Nazi bunk beds as a repressive symbol of confinement, the Jungfernhof Memorial tells one unifying story about the victims, the perpetrators, and the collaborators. No one is left out, and that is not consistent with many memorial projects. They focus on the victims, and we forget to look at the interrelationships between these groups. Memorial culture is directly related to the process of coming to terms with the past. Nations responsible for these crimes must lead this process. Descendants, local community residents, families touched by genocide, and caring individuals are invited to join the effort to commemorate this important camp. I'm going to stop now. I want to make sure that you see what this field looks like. It's open. I don't know if it'll always be open, but right now it is. So, what will happen? How will this project be developed? Who will come and visit the site? Will there be educational programs? I'm giving you some contact information, but basically, if you go on the lockerofmemory.com website, you will have access to everything we've talked about today, including detailed scientific reports from Phil for three reports, I believe. There's also a place on the website where you can send a message, an open message to me, and it will go to the group. And I want to stop here so we have adequate time for questions. Thank you very much. I'm also interested in your feedback about the memorial.
Thank you so much, Karen. We have been given permission from Emma to go a little bit over to 2:30, which is great because we have a lot of questions. So Emma, I'm just going to rely on you to cut me off when you feel that we've gone past our allotted time.
I think
All
give
right.
it about, we can go about 5 minutes over, something
Okay.
like that.
Okay, so let me start with the first question. There are many really good questions. This is from a teacher, a professor who is in Germany. And she says, she or he says, I've been studying the fate of some Jewish inhabitants of my local hometown, Vincennes, south of Hamburg, together with my students. Most of them were sent to Jungfernhof. For one couple, sources from after the war state that they were sent to Auschwitz from Jungfernhof or Riga ghetto as of 26 March 1943, but they cannot verify that with sources from Auschwitz. Do you know of any transports to Auschwitz other than the one in November 1943 when the ghetto got liquidated? Or could there have been a mix-up and the date, though in the wrong year, refers to another killing in 1942? So does someone want to take that, Richards or Ilya? Richards?
I can at least start by taking a stab at it. So there were deportations to Auschwitz from the Riga ghetto in 1943, more than one. So, for example, there was a Holocaust survivor, Herbert May, who was sent at the age of 12 to Jungfernhof, and his parents were both sent to Auschwitz in 1943. I would need more details about the exact town and so on, so you could contact me. But it's certainly, I'll give it to Ilya if he has anything to add.
Yeah, so I think there is a bit of a mix-up because as the date 26th of March 42 is mentioned, so it's the date of this second so-called Dunnemund action. So when people from Jungfernhof were taken under false pretext of being resettled, were taken to Bitternecke Forest and murdered. And I think this was the fate of most of the Jews from Hamburg transport, especially we discuss people of advanced age, with it was medical conditions of those who were considered to be unable to work. So I would presume that in this case, Auschwitz is a mistake, although big part of Hamburg Jews went to Auschwitz, and that's why it could be that people thought that all of them ended up in Auschwitz. Yeah, but in this case, I would presume that people we're discussing, they were killed in Dunnemund action, so they were buried in Bitternecke Forest. But of course, yeah, it would be good to get more information.
So the next question, Phil, is for you. This person would like a little bit more detail about that you will be in Latvia this coming summer to do more research, and what specifically will you be doing?
Okay, great. Yes, well, we will be in Latvia. We're assembling our research team now, and we're assembling our students. I'll be working with Dr. Harry Joel again from University of Wisconsin Eau Claire. He'll be bringing 5 students. I'm bringing 2 students. We sometimes hook up with other students and researchers in Latvia as well. We'll be there pretty much for the whole month of July, and we will be working at Jungfernhof at the beginning of July, and we're still trying to find the location of the mass grave. The park that was built there has a rather large parking lot, and we're going to search the parking lot this year to see if the mass grave might be under the parking lot. We're also going to continue to map out the foundation of the barracks as well to see how much of that is still preserved in the subsurface. And then we'll be working in Liepāja as well. And we have worked in Liepāja, Latvia for the last 5 years. We'll be working at the port, and we'll be working at Šķēda, where 2,800 children were murdered and buried in a mass grave. At Šķēda, there's a big point of contention as to whether that mass grave is still there. It's been washed out to sea. So we've been working there the last couple of years to locate that. And then we're also working in the Livas Cemetery as well. There's supposed to be a mass grave in the Jewish section of the cemetery. So yes, we will be in Latvia next summer.
So I have a question myself, Phil, for you, which
Sure.
is, do you believe that the fact that the mass grave hadn't been found is that it doesn't exist, and somehow the history was wrong or convoluted, or that it's simply in a different place and the area is so large that sampling many different places is a very substantial task?
Yeah, I'll say a few things, and I'm sure I'll turn it over to Richard, the historian, as well. But it's in the historic record, it's in testimony that the bodies were piled up behind a shed over that hard winter. And then in the spring, when the ground started to thaw, they took dynamite and tried to blast a hole. So we have a pretty good idea where the buildings were because we have the air photographs, 1944 and 1917. So one of those buildings was the shed, and bodies were piled up behind that. But then there's no testimony of where they took the bodies to bury them, where that place that they blasted into the ground is. Logic would say you don't take them very far. If you're trying to take 800 bodies from somewhere and you've had them piled up all winter, you must not care that you have all these bodies piled up. So it would probably be fairly close by. And we've searched a rather large area, and we've done a lot of data collection. And more we're starting to think maybe that it's under where the garden plot area is now. So I'll turn it over to Richard to maybe fill in a little bit of the history. detail as well.
Sure. So I could just say a couple things. So the total area of the site is 480 acres. So it's a vast area. The existence of the mass grave and the estimated number of bodies in it appears in testimony after testimony after testimony after testimony after testimony. It's universally attested to by the survivors. One curious thing is that so the Nazis deliberately tried to destroy as much evidence as they could, as they saw that they were losing the war and that the Red Army was going to take over all these sites. So they had a special program for exhuming bodies from 1941 and 1942 and burning them and trying to cover up the evidence. But we know that that program never extended to Jungfernhof. And then another peculiarity is that the Soviet Extraordinary State Commission that Ilya referenced also did not search the site for forensic evidence. There was abundant mass graves to be investigated in Bikernieki and Rumbula as it was. And so this site was passed over. So we have absolutely every reason to believe it's still there. It's just a humongous site.
Yeah,
Aaron?
so one I just want to add to what Richard said. So we have to understand that it was a restricted military area all through the Soviet times. So of course, theoretically, there is a tiny possibility that the Soviets at some point have found the grave and like reinterred the remains quietly. But it's not very likely. Yeah, so most probably the grave is still somewhere there, but we just do not know where it is. And even with the best technologies like Philip uses, it's very time consuming. Yeah, so it's a limited area that you can cover. And of course, we first started working in an open area, which does not mean that in maybe in 5 or 10 years we'll have I don't know laser beams penetrating through the earth that can go through buildings and so on that completely change our opportunities to find the grave, our possibilities.
Karen?
I just want to add one thing. Fred Zilberger, who is a survivor who I interviewed specifically about the mass grave, was 12 years old and he was asked to help dig that mass grave to straighten out the edges. So he has personal memories that is in a testimony that is on the website. In a detailed interview, I showed him maps of the area and I said, was it buried here? Was it buried here? You know, but the land looks totally different right now. I will want to add a little piece of reality. If we had more money, we could have Phil stay longer to do more research. It has been a really, small amount of research that he can do every time he comes. So it's been covered over many years, and that's the reality of our situation. But we all believe the grave is there.
Ilya, I believe you said, although I could have misunderstood, that in order to actually get a lot of support from Latvia for the memorial, that the mass grave had to be found. How important is it? Isn't the barracks just as essential?
No, it's a little bit the other way around. So I mean, we knew about the grave all the time. Yeah, because it actually appears in the documents that the potatoes were planted over it. Yeah, and I think Zach Trial recorded that he used to say the Jews make a good fertilizer. I mean, Zach was an agronomist by training, and so his jokes were that sort of jokes. So we, as the museum, did not go into trying to find the grave because it was 90s. We didn't have technology, we didn't have money, we didn't have anything. Yeah. So the municipality, when Karen, assisted by me, came to them in 2019, we told them about the grave, and they said, okay, maybe if you find the grave, this can be the location of the memorial. While looking for the grave, and that's how Richard Freund of blessed memory appeared and brought Phil and Harry. So while looking for the grave, we understood that, okay, we should do something if we do not find the grave. And that's how we came up with the idea that it could be barrack, and very conveniently, Philip has found the barrack. And it's very important. Before we also had some buildings located. We knew where some buildings were, but this barrack is the only one that was built as a part of the camp. It's not part of a 17th century estate with its own interesting and important history. It's the only object related to the camp, so it's a very good anchor for the memorial. And so, I mean, the municipality has no opinion to that because this memorial barrack is the very new thing we found. So we are now kind of discussing this location. Yeah, but the municipality was open to, whatever, more or less whatever we propose, I would say.
So, Karen, would you place the memorial where the barrack on the ground
Yes,
above where the barrack was found?
I did not really have a chance to go into the details, but the perimeter of the rocks that I hope Phil finds the memorial will be built in that. And it's a fairly large shape. It's a U shape. I thought it was originally going to be a rectangle, but it's a U shape. So we will build a simile of a barracks, but it will be an artistic interpretation of blackened steel. It will be high so you can see it. It will have the quality of memorial, and it will be a geometric form. It also is an original idea. There are not barracks built. There's not even a lot of literature about barracks. It's really a kind of under-researched site. But particularly for this project, where, well, is there a grave? Isn't there a grave? There is a barracks. So it is using what exists and creating a memorial out of history that exists. It's not made up, it's not an overreach. In addition, we want to include names. It's going to be a naming memorial. The idea was to encase it in glass so you could see the barracks inside. Um, bulletproof glass is in fact not bulletproof. So we have to really think about vandalism and new materials that would really be the best to use around for the names. And in the center, in that little square in the center, I want to create a kind of sanctuary where we build a potato farm, some kind of image of a potato farm as symbolic of the lost mass grave that we can't find, so that it exists and it becomes a centerpiece within sort of artistic license within this structure. But everything is complicated, including these stones around the perimeter. When you have snow and rain coming, how do we preserve those stones so that we can see them? So we will need to build some kind of channel that has drainage with glass on top of it, so those stones will really define and reference what the memorial, what the barracks are about. So I'm thrilled about this image. It feels, very solid, and it will also leave many opportunities for interpretation and storytelling and building curriculum on that
So,
object.
and thank you, Ilya. Thank you, Karen and Ilya, very much for mentioning our beloved colleague, Richard Freund, who was, as we often call him, the inventor of Holocaust archaeology.
Mhm.
I know Phil feels the same way as I do. We have one more question from our participants, from Lev Friedman. How is it that the commandant of the camp was eventually released when so many were tried and hung? It's a great question.
So I can jump in and take that. So the my most of my work actually centers on the legal aftermath of the Holocaust. So not on the Holocaust per se, but the response of justice to atrocity. And in fact, now that it's 80 years gone since the crimes themselves, that whole process, the legal process of adjudicating the crimes of the Nazis, is now itself a subject of historical inquiry. And pretty famously, the West German judiciary did not cover itself in glory in this in this whole episode. So what was most remarkable about Seck's prosecution is that it happened at all. Most of the people who committed the Holocaust completely walked. And in Seck's case, not only was he tried, but he was tried very early. So West Germany didn't really start autonomously arresting and investigating and prosecuting and convicting and sentencing Nazi war criminals until 1958. But Seck was arrested in 1945 by the British, and he was part of a big complex of cases called the Riga ghetto case that the British were building. They had about 80 people in custody. They had a huge amount of witness testimony from survivors that they had been gathering and all this other stuff. And then inexplicably, the British decided not to go forward with that case and instead handed all of the individual cases to the newly created West German judiciary in 1949. And so SEC was tried individually. There was no Riga ghetto case that would have brought, public attention to the whole story of the Holocaust in Latvia. And I mean, so SEC was convicted of 8 counts of murder, which is an absurdly de minimis number. I mean, it's totally incommensurate with what his actual crimes were, but it did get him the maximum penalty allowable in West Germany, which was life in prison. And so he was convicted of 8 counts of murder and sentenced to 8 consecutive life in prison sentences. But he got out on parole in 1964 and spent the whole last 10 years of his life in freedom right near his hometown. And do I have an explanation for that? I don't. But try this one on for size. Victor's Arais, who was the leader of this unit, he went underground and was arrested in 1975 in West Germany, convicted in 1979 of 13,000 counts of murder, died in prison in 1988. But when he actually died, he was on his way back from visiting his girlfriend's house in Frankfurt. So he was allowed to actually leave prison on a regular basis for conjugal visits. So, I mean, the West German judiciary treated most of these people pretty leniently, and we can all be dissatisfied with that. But here's my whole thesis from my book, which is that all of the traditional ways that we think of, in terms of the function of the judiciary to give compensation to the victims and to punish the perpetrators, to deter future crimes, none of that, all of that breaks down when it's confronted with crimes of the magnitude of the Holocaust. But the real value is the investigations themselves and the information that they provide to historians and then through historians to posterity. So as dissatisfying as SEC's personal fate is to us, the investigation nevertheless yielded a lot of useful information. And so that's the most I can really say.
Well, thanks very much, Richards and Ilya and Phil. Karen, would you like the last word?
Yes, I just want to reassure everyone, if you're interested in this material, go to the website. So much of what has been said is on the website. And we have recording this program, so it will be uploaded to Temple Israel's website and to our website, so you will get notification of that.
And
Yeah,
the
and
URL of the
it's important that
the
you can.
website, Karen?
What?
The URL
Well,
of the website.
if you go to the website, it's www.thejungfernhof
Thank you so much. Thanks, everyone. Thank you, Temple Israel, for allowing this really informative session to take place.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much for joining us. Thank you to Karen and Paula, Richard, Phil, Ilya. That was really fantastic. I just want to say a quick word about some of Temple Israel's upcoming programs and then enjoy the rest of your day. Obviously, Monday, March 2nd is Purim, and we hope you'll join us for that. And then on March 5th to 7th, we have the official U.S. launch of The Holy and the Broken, a cry for Israeli-Palestinian peace from a land that must be shared with Itai Fleischer. And then, of course, on March 29th, Karen will be joining us again for a workshop on capturing and honoring family memories. And then, of course, we have many other programs both on site and online. And my colleague Erin just put links to all of those in the chat as well. We'll be sending out a follow-up email with the link Karen mentioned to the memorial website. So you'll get that in your email within the next couple days. And for those of you in Boston and elsewhere, I hope you all stay warm with our upcoming weather and enjoy the rest of your day.